So I read this article, I just read it, and it talked about the appeal of frugal billionaires, or why we think, or why we like to think that billionaires are being frugal. And the author, she put it as, we like to think of billionaires as being frugal because it means that if we are frugal also, because frugality is something that we fetishize in this culture, then and we can all become rich, we can all become millionaires, we can all become billionaires. And Mark Cuban says this in the article. They quote him as saying, when he was young, he used to live in an apartment with 5 roommates, and he had the worst car, and he never spent money or went to the movies and stuff like that. And this really pissed me off, obviously. Otherwise I wouldn't be making this, because for one, that's not how wealth works. Nobody saves themselves into richness. It's not something you can even do. Okay? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how wealth is created in the first place. Or as some communists would say, wealth is taken in the first place. So I thought I'd rant about that for a little bit, Okay, first things off. Why you can't save yourself into richness. Let's think about it logically for a second, okay? Let's say you have a fixed amount of income. You make a certain amount per year, okay? And you save half of that, which is basically insane. No one does that. Savings percentages aren't usually tabulated, but people usually at most save 10% to 15% of every paycheck that they get, which already is a high amount. Nobody even saves that amount usually. Usually people don't save anywhere near that, and that's why a sudden $500 expense in the US means bankruptcy for the majority of homes. Everyone's living paycheck to paycheck, okay? So that's first off. Second off, even if you're saving that much money, let's think about that. Let's put some numbers to it, shall we? Let's put some numbers. Say you're making $60,000 a year, and you save half of that, which we've already determined is basically insane. No one does that. You would have to live so far below your quality of life. But anyway, let's assume that you save 50% of whatever you make, okay? So you save $30,000 a year for what? Your entire working life, right? From the time that you're 22 to the time that you're 65, which is retirement age. That's 43 years. 43 years times 30,000 is what? $1.26 million. That's what it is. $1.29 million. Yeah, there you go. $1.29 million you've saved over your entire life. Now what? Now what are you going to do? You retire, and then what? You retire, and then what do? You retire, and you have no income now. So what does that mean? That means you have $1.29 million. Let's assume single income household, 2 people to support in retirement. $1.29 million to do with as you will for the remainder of your life. Now I assumed 65 as the retirement age, and most people, I think life expectancy right now is currently in the 80s, 82 being the average male life expectancy in Japan. Let's assume that. So 17 years to spend $1.29 million. What does that work out to? Slightly over $100,000 a year. Okay? So you've saved, or you've worked for 43 years. 43 years, the vast majority of your life, to save up $1.29 million, which is already unrealistic, so that you can spend $100,000 a year for the last 17 years of your life, which, let's remember, you've been living off $30,000 for the past 43 years of your life, okay? So you living off 100K is like tripling your annual income for 17 years. You see where this breaks down? You're not rich. You've increased your income by 50% for 17 years, which is 1/3 or like almost 1/4 of what you realistically could have done if you had invested it into something else, okay? This is how money actually works. You can't save yourself into richness. That's not something you can do. That doesn't mean that you're entitled now to spend all the money that you make, because it doesn't work that way either. If you spend everything that you make, you're not saving anything, and that's even worse than saving all too much. Okay, you want to strike a reasonable balance. If you're just saving all your money, that money's not doing anything for you. It's just sitting in an account becoming worth less and less every year, because that's how money works. There's something called inflation, and there's something called an interest rate, right? In developed countries, interest rates are super low, inflation is super low. Generally, inflation is still higher than interest rates though. That means your money is becoming worth less and less, okay? The more you put it in the bank, the longer you leave it in the bank for, it's worth less. That's just how it works. And in 43 years, your 1.29 million may not be worth the 1.29 million that you think of today. It might be worth, let's see, 0.015 times 10 to the 43. What's that? Whatever that is, that's approximately how much less it's worth, or 1.015. Let's do that. Divided by that number then. Okay? Don't make me do math while I'm holding a camera. The point is, it's going to be worth a lot less. Your 1.29 million that you think of in your head might only be worth 650,000 of today's dollars in that time. We're thinking 43 years from now, okay? Imagine 43 years ago. That's 1975. In 1975, whatever money you had, if you had it today, would be worth a lot more because of inflation. Money depreciates over time. That's what it does. That means you want to put your money into something that appreciates over time, so you're canceling out the depreciation and making some extra money on the back end, okay? Now, a lot of people say invest in real estate, invest in this, invest in that. I don't know about all that. I'm just talking about wealth for right now, and billionaires in specific. Now, currently, there is an act being proposed by the US Congress called Stop Bezos Act, which is, I think, one of the most clever acronyms ever invented. It's being pushed by Bernie Sanders, who wants to institute a special tax on billionaires like Jeff Bezos in order to help pay for food stamps and things like that because they're not paying their employees enough, right? And in response to just the proposition of this law, Jeff Bezos he basically said that he's going to raise the minimum wage in all Amazon facilities and all Amazon run and owned facilities to $15 an hour by 2020. At the drop of a hat, he did that, like with zero pressure. The law wasn't even passed. It was just tabled in Congress. That's it. That's all the pressure that it took to make him cave and realize that he had to do this, right? So my question is, how far can this go? Right? If he's willing to make it $15 with this much pressure, can he be persuaded to go higher, right? Because one of the things about Amazon is that they're very anti-union, or they're not anti-union because that's illegal, but they don't encourage making unions either. So if you're this opposed to unions forming in your warehouses and you're willing to cough up $15 an hour for every employee just to prevent a union from coming around, what would happen if there was a union? Would it be pushing too far? Would he go, okay, this is just too much now, these people want too much, let's get rid of them and make robots? I don't think so, and here's why. Let me tell you. So robots, according to what I know about Amazon's warehouse system, which is probably a lot more than you people, I have inside information. So the robots that these people are proposing are not super advanced robots. They're pretty shit, okay? So robot technology has not advanced to the point yet where they can just straight up replace people and just put robots instead. That's not a thing yet. So realistically, no matter how unrealistic the demand is, the only thing he can do is fire his entire workforce and hire new people. And from what I've heard about Amazon's workflow, it's not very intuitive and it takes a long time to get used to and to perform at max efficiency. Which means the workers aren't all that replaceable. Which means if they were to unionize, he would have no real recourse except to accept. Especially if they were to do it around a busy period, like say the coming December, you know? Now, I'm not suggesting that Amazon employees should unionize, any more than I'm saying that Tesla employees should unionize, since they're the only auto workers in the entirety of North America that don't have a union. General Motor Company, also United Auto Workers, is a huge union in the US, one of the biggest, and they spend a lot of time making sure that their employees get properly compensated, which is one of the reasons why the companies that are under the purview of that union take their business to other countries, because they don't want to deal with the unions. It's something that modern companies don't want to deal with, right? That's why Tesla doesn't have a union. I think before Amazon, we should really push the Tesla workers to unionize, because come on, they're specialized workers. They have training in car assembly, which is something that should be rewarded rightfully very highly. Not everyone can assemble a car and do all the electronics and everything like that. So maybe they should unionize before the Amazon people should, for sure. So in the end, the workers are the ones that are being kind of shunned when we go in pursuit of the myth of the frugal billionaire, right? Because if they're being frugal about their flights and their houses and everything like that, that also means they're being frugal in places where they need to spend more money. Okay, that's part one. Let's talk about part two. Why billionaires exist in the first place, all right? Billionaires exist in the first place because we have this system where capital is allowed to accrue in the hands of very few just because they were the ones to start a particular company. There are being laws proposed right now to tackle this, where they say that a certain percentage of a company's equity has to be owned by the workers. And I think that is a good way to deal with that. But one of the better ways, more radical ways to change this entirely would be just to have companies be owned by the workers in the first place, right? Just because one person has the idea to make a company, they were the first mover, for example. This is a very Judeo-Christian belief system we have here. Just because one person was the first mover of a company does not mean that they're solely responsible for the success of a company. That's not how companies work. Just because Mark Zuckerberg came up with the idea for Facebook doesn't mean he's responsible for now 2 billion people using Facebook, or having Facebook accounts at least. I don't know how many of them use it. Not many people, surely. Like I haven't used Facebook in 5 years or something. So if you reward people equally for the amount of work that they put in, right? Like I'm not saying that the people at the very top of the company, the executives, need to have the same amount of shares as the factory workers or the people who watch the data servers or anything like that. I'm just saying that there has to be a more equitable distribution of equity, strangely enough. So when you have this more equitable distribution of equity, what that means is workers are more invested in the success of the company, right? That means they're more willing to go the extra mile because they feel invested in the company and they can't as easily be screwed out of anything. Okay? If you hold like 10 shares of a company right at the start, those 10 shares may only be worth $100 at IPO or whatever, but 10 years down the line, those 10 shares might be worth $10,000. You don't know. Tech companies grow very quickly. It's hard to gauge exactly how successful a tech company will be at the outset. And they do this to some extent with the upper level executives and everyone that they hire at the very beginning of companies. They do give a lot of equity, which may or may not be bought out when new investors come in. But that is a practice that we allow and we encourage, except when it comes to just before the IPO, when there are still people working in their thousands for your company, but we don't reward them like we do the people who came first for some reason. Just because the CFO came on board before 1,000 factory workers doesn't make the 1,000 factory workers any less important. I'm not saying they're equally important or equally important to the smooth running of a company, but I am saying that the numbers are disproportionate enough that there could be a little bit more compensation on the bottom end to maybe balance it out a little bit. Okay, let's talk about something else. And one thing that we've lost for sure in our push towards larger and larger tech companies, right? And I don't want to argue that all the companies that we use on a day-to-day basis on the internet should not be private companies in the first place, but think about it, right? The internet is not owned by any one corporation or any one country. Imagine if it was, right? You'd think the flow of information would be far less democratic than it is today. But think of an alternate timeline where Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, all were not private companies, were just part of the internet already. Like the internet just came with all these servers to begin with, and they were hosted and paid for by the people who paid for the internet itself, right? I think we'd have a lot more constructive conversation if that was the case, because a lot of the conversation we have nowadays revolves around, do we have the right to ask for certain things because these entities are private companies? And I think that question being asked in the first place brings up an interesting question about monopolies that we have, which we haven't had in a while, right? When the railway company and the public utility power company were not public utilities in the past, there was competition for it, and eventually it became so essential that they were just incorporated into the government and became part of that. Now, I'm not suggesting that Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon be incorporated into the government, right? I'm just giving those 4 sites as an example, but I do think like the vast majority of internet traffic goes to a handful of sites, which did not used to be the case in the past when the internet was more decentralized, and now it's become so centralized to the point where these companies have so much control over how the internet is used. And a recent example of this is Facebook tried to give free internet to people in poor countries, but the internet, not the internet that we know, it was Facebook's internet, like sites pre-approved by Facebook and also Facebook for free to people. And that was quickly shut down by all those governments because they saw, as we do, that this is This is not really a goodwill gesture. This is more of a trap to get people used to using Facebook before they even get the internet. And this is ultimately advantageous only for Facebook and not really for the people who end up using the service, because if they had real internet, they'd have access to a lot more than what Facebook is willing to give them for free. Just because you get something for free doesn't mean it's worth getting. Sometimes getting things for free can be a pain in the ass, as we've come to realize now. With us all getting these services for free, that was really just kind of the initial, like, kind of loss leader setup that's resulted in the data mining market that we see before us today. Tech companies, I think now they would no longer like to go to a situation where they charge you straight up for the services that you use of theirs. I think there was a time when they would have preferred that, but that time is not now anymore. Maybe right at the beginning, if subscription fees for Facebook had been a thing, and they knew why they couldn't be a thing, is because nobody wants to try anything when it costs money. It's much easier to try something and stick with it if it's free than if you're paying for it, because there's this pressure to ask, are you really using it? And I think if Facebook had a subscription model, it would have been slower to catch on and faster to die. So definitely their free model was the way to go for their business plan. But now they're caught at this interesting crossroads where people are asking for the paid subscription. There was a recent survey that they handed out where they asked people if they would like to use Facebook for free with their data being mined or for a paid subscription, and a bunch of people answered that they would rather have it be paid. So I think it's interesting to see that the customer themselves is now asking for it. And I don't want to call a all according to plan kind of move on this, but think about it from the beginning. If Facebook had launched with a subscription, then there would be a pressure to reduce the subscription price more and more to get people to come on. But now they've reached this interesting crossroads where people don't want it to be free anymore, and instead of being exploited, they'd rather trade that free for a small fee per month. Because most of Facebook's users, from anecdotal evidence, are old people. I don't think that many young people use Facebook, not Messenger. That's not Facebook. The service itself for anything other than talking to people. It's only really the older people that are posting things on Facebook actively. So for them, having their data be mined seems like a return to a previous era where phone tapping was a large scandal, which no longer is, by the way. We're constantly being surveilled and we're just all okay with it somehow. So when they move back to this old era by paying the subscription, which subscriptions have precedence as well. Netflix is the famous subscription precedent for pretty much everything. And a new model for startups everywhere is to say, we're the Netflix of this. We're the Netflix of dog treats, like whatever it is. MoviePass is the Netflix of watching movies in theaters. That's a pretty interesting pitch for anybody because Netflix is so successful. If Facebook launched today by saying we're the Netflix of Facebook, do you think there would be a big market for it? And to me, it seems like yes. This could be something that we move towards on the internet as a whole, because Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet, a couple days ago announced that he's starting a new project called Solid, where he works to make the information that's mined from users to be help it be portable and decentralized, right? So there's no one huge server where millions and millions of fields of customer data is being stored. It's accessed as needed from the client themselves, because all your data is stored locally. And it's portable, which means you can revoke access to your data at any time. And this is something that we could not have done previously because the technology wasn't there. And servers have been kind of the de rigueur of computer web serving for a long time now, but I think we're in a way moving away from that. Like, peer-to-peer connections have been a thing for a while, and I know there are several video hosting sites that are currently pushing towards peer-to-peer hosting for video and other more bandwidth intensive requirements. And ultimately, you do need a good internet connection at the end of the day. And I do think upload speed will be more important come in the future, because if you're constantly seeding the videos that you have with you, this is on a peer-to-peer theoretical network, that means that your ability to share videos that either you've created or that you support enough to seed is based purely on your upload speed. So I think upload speed will be something that we'll see an increase of in the future, or push to increase in the future. But anyway, I was talking about is decentralizing the data that we see also makes it much harder for hackers to hack. Or like recently there was a data hack on Facebook that compromised the personal information of some 50 million users, and they've been sniffing out the cause of it and sending out like apologies and we're sorry type videos, or not type messages to people who were affected. But at the end of the day, when you make a pot of gold somewhere, it only means that you're challenging the thieves to come and take it. If you hide one gold coin in a hiding place in every house, it makes it a lot harder for people to steal your stuff. And I think that's the move for the next 10 years of the internet, is going to be a focus on decentralization, because as we've seen, aggressive centralization and focusing power and information in the hands of a few has not worked very well. And I think one of the things that's holding us back the most is free video hosting, because YouTube, as we all know and as we've been told a million times, doesn't make any money. They actively report a loss, or they break even barely every single year, right? And they have to keep certain expenses, and they can't compromise on those expenses, right? One of them is paying out your content creators. They can't change that. Content creators already feel cheated that they receive so little a cut from all the work they put into their content, and they know subconsciously that if they had a platform of their own, they would make more money. That's just something that you do. But Google knows that YouTube is so important to their bottom line as a whole alphabet parent corporation, that you can't compromise on things that you do with YouTube. Now, I do think there are corners that they can cut, limiting the initial quality of videos you can upload for new people might be one of them. But I see why they don't want to do that. They want to encourage people to upload high quality video content to YouTube in the first place, and the way to do that is to extend that ability to all people who are on the platform. So video hosting might be the hardest thing to do decentralized, just because it's so bandwidth intensive that if you want to have a decent quality stream of any video that you want to watch on a particular decentralized node in a theoretical video hosting network, that means whoever hosts all the videos in that node, either the videos have to be hosted so widely that a good percentage of people will be uploading at any given time, which I don't think is a given. Not everyone runs their computers 24/7, even their primary computer. Not many people run it 24/7. And for videos that don't have as wide a reach, they would have to be very aggressively seeded by the person who made the videos in the first place. And that sounds like a good enough idea, but if you're serving videos to like 100 people, quickly it becomes very hard to keep up. And anyone who's tried to start or set up a video hosting server knows this. The bandwidth there's not enough bandwidth to go around, and getting more bandwidth is insanely expensive. And that's just a reality of the internet that we live in today. If you're a reasonable sized business, maybe you could afford to do that. But I think for now, with the current paradigm that we have for video hosting, I don't think it can be effectively decentralized with anything near the amount of content that we have available to us today, right? If we want to dramatically scale back the amount of content that we have and have a peer-to-peer Netflix, I do think it's possible, because Netflix doesn't even have a vanishingly small amount of the amount of content that's on YouTube. Netflix has nowhere near the amount of content that YouTube has, and it doesn't reach nearly as many people as YouTube does, but it makes more money than YouTube does, because YouTube's costs scale as with their users. Netflix's don't really. The more views that YouTube gets, that means the more ad payments they have to give out, and it means the more video streams they have to serve. But for Netflix, each user is a fixed amount of income and a very small amount of cost compared to the money that they pay, right? That's why the Netflix model is sustainable. For a service like YouTube, I think this means, they've tried to do this recently, by the way, they're encouraging people to subscribe to YouTube Music and things like that, because $10 is probably much more than the cost of the content and the services to serve you that content that you use. If you watched 4K video 24 hours a day for the entire month, maybe you might come close to half that. But other than that, I don't think you're really challenging their infrastructure if you watch a normal amount of videos and you pay them $10 a month. That's way more money than they make off you by you just watching ads. It's not even close. Even if you were watching 24 hours of videos a day for an entire month, $10 would still be more than the amount of ads that you see in that time. Ads don't make that much money, and the CPMs on YouTube are not particularly lucrative. I think there's a future for a platform that offers ad-free content. Like we've already seen several other companies try to catch up on that. Like Vessel came and went. There are a lot of other premium video services that just collapsed under the cost of hosting video. I think a company like Linus Tech Tips' Float Plane Club is inherently more sustainable just because they have so much experience with video content on the internet that they know how to serve the customers that they're looking for, and I don't think they're willing to scale as aggressively as other companies. Now, what does that mean for the future of web video? Because video content is very quickly becoming the go-to type of content that most people consume on the internet just because it's so easy to consume and it's visually appealing. Whereas reading takes more time and you have to pay attention to it, and there's not fancy pictures coming at your face, you know? It's understandable why video is more appealing. Video has always been more appealing. It's just that its access has been limited. So I don't see any problem with video being the go-to medium for the dispersal of information in the current age. But the problem is video is so inherently information dense that it's hard to get it out there with anything other than a centralized, very, very beefed up infrastructure. There have been some developments on this. Live streaming video I don't think works peer-to-peer. I may be proven wrong on this, but I don't see how you would fix the latency when you're live streaming peer-to-peer. There may be new decentralized technologies that make this easier. I'm not aware of any at the moment, but I'm sure there are new ones coming all the time. Blockchain-based web browsing is more interesting to me than web video hosting, just because it seems like that you could scale more, but I don't think you can handle multimedia heavy sites like we see today. And definitely not anything with video content, because the blockchain would be so big that who would download it at that point? I don't know how we're going to solve this problem. It's the last problem we have to solve, I think, other than the whole hardware problem with the internet being just centralized by nature. The last problem to becoming a fully decentralized internet. I hope it happens soon. It's something that I would like to see happen before I die for sure. So blockchain people or peer-to-peer people or just general decentralized network people get to work, you know? Maybe machine learning can develop some new kind of crazy compression that actually makes this possible. I don't see how, but I'm willing to be proven wrong. So yeah, the internet, I want it to be decentralized. I think it needs to be. The power needs to be returned to the users who have given it over to these large companies who are abusing them and using them for money. And the whole centralization is why we have all these tech billionaires in the first place, you know? When you're getting all this information and all this input and selling ads to hundreds of millions of users, it becomes very easy to get way too rich for your own good. So, peace.